The world is a book. Read it. And you know what? There is a chapter in that book that's about you. It's your chapter. What will you contribute to the world? What is your chapter going to say? Sitting and learning at the feet of 80 different Indigenous elders and 4 Civil Rights era elders for over 110 hours, facilitating more than 100 days of retreats, presenting to thousands of educators and others from around the world, and modeling culturally responsive practices in classrooms across the Midwest for the past 8 years has informed the chapter we want to contribute to the world. As K-12 classroom and higher education teachers and now learning specialists, we bring over 50 combined years in education. During that time, we have witnessed a change in teaching. Something once considered an art by many, teaching is often reduced to a culture of compliance driven by systems of accountability. How have we gotten to the place we are in now in education? Teachers have shared with us over and over their frustration of being stripped of their professional capacity to think and respond to the needs of their students in order to maintain pace and fidelity to a curriculum. How has education become so narrowly focused on test scores and the ranking of schools rather than the multitude of unique gifts and talents each of our students and teachers bring to the classroom each day? Our hope is that our time together will inspire us all to reclaim the art of being human in the world of education, to focus on our students, our colleagues, our administrators as human beings first, and their doings, their data, their labels second. Through stories, reflections, and experiences, as well as insights gained through the wisdom of elders and countless conversations with educators, we'll share our perspectives on how education can once again serve the learner, how trust can be at the center of our interactions, and how relationships form the basis for how we function as professionals. Uniqueness. Being human is celebrating individual uniqueness.
Let's have a Play-Doh party! Yeah! A shooting star!
You can have a Play-Doh party anytime with the Play-Doh Fun Factory.
I made spaghetti! Fire! Make a hose! No, it's a snake! I want your spaghetti. He got the spaghetti!
By yourself or with the gang, you can have a Play-Doh party.
It's fun!
The Play-Doh Fun Factory toy comes with everything you see here.
Play-Doh boy, Play-Doh boy, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, Play-Doh boy. 11, 12, 13, 14, Play-Doh boy. Middle school's a Play-Doh factory. Put them in and push the plunger down. Play-Doh boy. He lost the top of his head. He lost the tips of his fingers. Play-Doh boy. Play-Doh boy. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, Play-Doh boy. Nobody ever asked him, he would have told them. He liked drawing, you know, he liked the summer grass. Play-Doh boy. He loved the smell of the dirt. He loved to watch the ants carrying their dead back home. Play-Doh boy. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, Play-Doh boy. He had a cassette recorder. He had songs in his head. He placed them into the microphone. Play-Doh boy. Sitting in the plant, he felt the coolness steal the sand downstream. Play-Doh boy. Nobody ever asked him. He would have told them. He would have told them all. Play-Doh boy. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, Play-Doh boy. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, Play-Doh boy. The factory, they had holes like stars. They had holes like snakes and flowers, holes like spaghetti. The factory, they had holes like stars. Everybody likes stars. Push the plunger down. Push the plunger down. Play-Doh boy. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Play-Doh boy, he could have been anything. He could have been anything. Play-Doh boy. Play-Doh boy. There's all kinds of stars. There's all kinds of stars. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Play-Doh boy. Play-Doh boy. Play-Doh boy.
Hi, I'm Scott Simpson. I'm a learning specialist from Thai. And first of all, I want to thank you all for inviting us into your homes, both for the full Thai conference as well as for this keynote. Sharla and I are very grateful to be able to do this with you. We were super excited about doing it face to face, but this has been terrific. So we hope that it's helpful to you as well. I'd like to talk a little bit about the song that you just heard. That I wrote a few years ago in retreat with a number of educators. It was about my middle school experience. We were all looking at our experiences as students and kind of bringing them to bear on what we think about our work now as professional educators. And so I want to start with a quote from Henry David Thoreau. What lies behind us and what lies ahead of us are tiny matters compared to what lives within us. So what I realized when I was thinking back to my middle school experience was that everything about middle school was about what was in front of me or what was behind me. What was in front of me was the next test that was coming up, or it was the big assignment that we were getting ready for, or it was the big project that was coming up that I had to get all the stuff together ready for. What was behind me was the grades that I needed to overcome that weren't so good, that were really hurting my grade point average, that were really a problem, or even the really positive things. The great thing that I had done, why can't I do that now? You know, I got to live up to the expectation I set for myself in the past. So everything was about this stuff that they wanted me to learn, that they had decided this is the stuff he needs to do. And it was all about what was in front of me or what was behind me. And very little of it was about what lived within me. And so because of that, and that's not the fault of those teachers, but it's the fault of our system and a long history of the way our system works, our system of education. But what happened was, by the time I entered 6th grade, I had learned a number of things that no one really wanted me to learn. I learned that boring was what school was, and so therefore boring was what learning was. Learning was boring. At least that's what I had learned. Because there was no one there to say, you know, that stuff that you're really excited about, that stuff you're really interested in, that stuff that you could do all day long, all of that stuff holds all kinds of keys to important things for you to learn, for you to grow in, maybe even for you to do for the rest of your life. That interest you have in recording music, that interest you have in watching ants, that interest that you have in telling stories, and all of these things, all of those things are learning. There was no one to tell me that. At least I wasn't hearing it. I wasn't in a place to hear it. It also felt like all the stuff that they wanted me to do, the way they organized things was to either create a punishment system. If I didn't do the stuff, I was gonna be in big trouble. Or if I did do the stuff, I was gonna get a bunch of rewards that they had lined up for me. I'd get to do this or I'd get to do that. And so it was all this manipulation to do the stuff that was so boring. And so because of that, you learn to just get the stuff done. Just do it so that you can get away. You can go for the weekend, or you get the holiday that's coming up, or pray for a snow day so you don't have to go in and do the boring stuff that has to do with learning. You can do the fun stuff that you want to do. Now, no one really wanted me to learn that, because we know, and I think even then we knew, that's not what learning's about. Learning's not an unnatural, harsh, horrible, boring thing. Learning's the most wonderful thing that we do as human beings. It's what life is about. It's about growing. But our system was designed in a way that didn't communicate that. So what I'd like to do is take a look at a few things having to do with that. So we're going to go back to the presentation here. You know, John Dewey in 1922, we had for years already been developing ways of testing, ways of seeing what have the people learned, what have they not learned, where is the good learning happening, and why is it happening, and which teachers, which schools, which approaches are creating the most learning. Well, we had worked since about 1835 or 36 on developing new ways of testing, of assessing, of testing and figuring out what was going on. And by 1922, John Dewey looked around and he said this: our mechanical industrialized civilization is concerned with averages and percents. The mental habit which reflects this social scene subordinates education and social arrangements based on averaged gross inferiorities and superiorities. And my paraphrase, my 21st century paraphrase of that last part of that quote, our mechanical industrialized civilization is concerned with averages, with percents. This obsession places learning and relationships last, behind the comparisons of deficits and strengths. And for me, in middle school, that's what it had become. Figuring out my deficits, figuring out my strengths, and comparing them with not only what I had done or hadn't done in the past, or what I was going to do or not do in the future, but also all the other students I was there with. And that's where we find ourselves now, in a system that is so obsessed with something that we definitely have to do. We have to assess. We have to know what's happening and what's working. But we've put that first. We've put that. This is not about bashing data collection or bashing assessment. This is about figuring out what things have to come first. How can we put learning and relationship in front of all of this obsession with comparing deficits and strengths and measuring deficits and strengths? So I want to look just a little bit at some research that comes, this was put together by NCTE, and just a couple of brief things. The problems that even research is showing us that come from this obsession with standardized testing. Student learning that could lead in positive directions is often diminished when tests prevent teachers from helping students develop the non-cognitive abilities that support better life outcomes. Those non-cognitive abilities, those things that we all think are important, because they're not non-cognitive, they don't show up on our tests. And so as teachers, we feel compelled to focus on the cognitive things, and some of those non-cognitive abilities just fall by the wayside, things that we could really help our students with. Studies show that elementary school students can begin to lose their sense of themselves as capable and able to do well in school and graduate when they see unknown adults as controlling the administration and consequences of the standardized tests they're required to take. As a student, you sit down, you fill in a bunch of bubbles, and it goes off somewhere. And somebody somewhere far away, some adult, sends you back a report that says, you're strong at this, you're weak at that. You become disempowered. You feel incapable of having control over your own life and your own consequences. Students who have literacy abilities that extend beyond but do not fully encompass the narrow band of skills measured by standardized tests may not understand or appreciate their own capacities, and they can become disengaged from school. That's what happened to me. My abilities, in fact, my literacy abilities, the things that I was really good at, they didn't fall into the plan at school. And so I felt unappreciated. I became disengaged. And really, because that's what I connected with learning, all those things that didn't fall into what I did, I kind of felt like I was probably not really that smart. So that's our problem. So I have a few questions. Is it possible that our testing could lead us somehow towards celebrating uniqueness rather than stamping it out? And what might that look like? Is there a way to make our deficits and strengths testing subordinate to our learning and relationships, to bring those things back into balance and the right relationship with each other? And lastly, this is not just with students, but with our adult colleagues as well. Can we lead with relationship and learning with each other as the adult leaders in the school, rather than leading with strengths, deficits, measurements, comparisons, all those things that hurt us as middle schoolers? They still hurt us as adults in that school setting. But that's the culture that we developed. It took us a long time to develop it, but it's that culture. And it's problematic when it comes to learning. Now, you may be asking, what about accountability? Accountability, we're all going to be held accountable. And how can we have accountability if we don't have testing? Well, you're right. Accountability is not going anywhere. But let's reframe that just a little bit. We're going to talk about an educator's brain on accountability. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is a kind of accountability that we all understand and deal with all the time. This is what is primarily present in most of our school settings. And we're going to call it transactional accountability. It goes something like this. If I'm accountable to the authorities, the federal, state, district, school administrators, etc., then I or we need to show that we are in compliance with particular requirements. So this creates a culture of compliance. It leads to human doings. We're defining each other by our data. There's a threat of job loss. There's a threat of the loss of funding. There's embarrassment. At the local level, but also maybe even statewide as people begin to look at different districts and different schools. So what that does is it ignites that amygdala, that part of our brains that's good at fight, flight, or freeze. But it takes us away from the creative part of our brains where we can do that deeper level thinking, and it leaves us acting and reacting out of fear. And that's when we see during testing time the stress levels with teachers and with students. We've got the kind of framing of accountability that puts us all in that amygdala. What if there was another way to frame accountability? Not get rid of it, but frame it differently. We're going to call that relational accountability. It goes something like this. I'm a key part of this community, parents, grandparents, colleagues, townspeople, and especially my students. I want to be and to do what's best for my students, for their families, for my town, for my community. Instead of a culture of compliance, this makes a culture of learning. It helps us treat each other as human beings ahead of the data, ahead of the doings. We're not just a sum of what we've done or haven't done. We're human beings. It helps me to be enacting my role in my community. And what's most important is it promotes empathy, compassion, and connection, because all of this resides in that frontal lobe, that place where empathy and compassion and connection and higher level thinking all happen. Because I'm not sparking my fear, I'm sparking my sense of community, of relationship. I begin to live in my frontal lobe. Would it be possible for us as schools, as communities, not to get rid of accountability, but to reframe it as relational accountability? Stop reminding each other of comparisons and deficits and strengths, and begin reminding each other that we're part of a community working together, and that I feel good when I know I'm fulfilling my responsibilities as part of that community, especially part of a learning community. So it's about reframing. With that in mind, we're going to go on to the next section, and Sharla's going to tell us some stories. Relationships. Celebrating individual uniqueness fosters healthy relationships.
As we think about relationships, one of the things that I would like to share with you today is a story, and it's really a story about a time in my classroom experience where relationships were really of the utmost importance. There was a little family that moved into our town, and I'd been teaching for a while, and when you're in a small town, you kind of get used to the families, and you've taught brothers and sisters and cousins to many of the kids that you end up getting in your classroom. And at this particular time, I was teaching third grade, and I had a family move in, and I found out I would be getting a student that I didn't know. And I was really excited to meet him and see what this little person was going to be like. And that first day of school came, and everything was like first days are. It's kind of busy and crazy, and I stepped out of my room for a few moments before school started, and I saw this mom and her son, who I assumed was my new student. standing out by the lockers, and she was wishing him well, gave him a hug, and left. And so I went and found him and brought him in my room so I could get him settled in his desk. And as he came in, I wanted to make sure he knew a couple people so that he wouldn't feel lonely or feel uneasy going out on the playground. So he kind of got settled a little bit, got his things in his desk, and then went outside. And that day it went really well, and he was wonderful, and just like so many of the students I've had, just really, really good at learning and excited to be there, and just like most of my students I've had. Well, at the end of that day, as you can imagine, the end of most first days is a great big sigh of relief, because it's been busy and you're back into this place of not being able to take breaks when you want to and eat when you want to and all of those things. And so I was sort of feeling that way and kind of cleaning up around my classroom as the day ended when I saw a face peeking around the corner of my door. And I went over, and here it was David's mom. And so I invited her in. I said, "Oh, come on in. I'd love to meet you and get to know you." And so we sat and visited for a little bit, but I could tell she was really uneasy. And she shared with me, just briefly, but that things had not gone well, and that they had left the place that they had been in a very quick way, in sort of an anxious and panicked way, because of some issues with her ex-husband. So at any rate, she was very nervous about being in this new community, and she shared that they didn't really have a home, that they were just going to kind of crash places until they could figure something out. And she shared with me that mostly what she needed is that she needed to know that her boys were safe during the day, and that, you know, she could try to get their life together. And so I assured her the best I could that, you know, while he was here in my class under my care, I'd do everything I could to make sure that he was safe and taken care of. And I let her know that, you know, if there's anything that you need or that I can help with, please let me know. And otherwise we'll just do the best we can and make sure that David has what he needs here. And so she kind of gave a quick look up and thank you and left. And it got me just wondering and thinking about this little guy that was in my care that year. And, you know, as we got started and the school year continued on, really all he needed was occasionally maybe an extra little granola bar in the morning to get him on his way. And he was so smart and doing so well in school. I was excited to see the success he was having in this new place. And so we went about our days for the first couple weeks, and then the mom came back. David's mom stopped in one day after school, and she was really excited, and she said, "Hey, I found us a place to live. I'm really excited. We get to live in these little cabins, and we can stay there in exchange for me cleaning the cabins." She was thrilled, and so was I. I was so excited for her and for their family. And so that solved their initial issue of making sure they had a place to stay. So that seemed to help settle David too, and make him feel a little bit more at home and rested and ready to learn each day when he came in. So time went by, and we got into the first kind of cold days, I would say, and it happened to be a Saturday. And I remember I was in my classroom that day, and I was kind of preparing some things for the week, and I got to thinking about this little family and kind of knew where they were staying, and I wondered if they had what they needed for this first cold weekend. If they had enough food, warm food, and things that could carry them through and make sure that they're okay. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go to the store. So I ran to the grocery store and picked up a few things and took them to their cabin. And as I walked up, I noticed that alongside of the door, you could actually see into the room where they were. It was a one-room cabin, had a bathroom, but basically everything else was just big enough to fit around a bed. And I knocked on the door, and David's mom answered, and she just kind of peeked around and looked, and I said, I just picked up a few things, wanted to make sure you had what you needed for this first kind of cold weekend. It's really getting cold out. And she said, "Oh yeah, okay, well, come on in." And so I saw that they had all been huddled on the bed under the blankets. It was really chilly in there. And I set this box down, and the boys immediately grabbed the bananas and peeled them and started eating them, and they were just starving. And the mom looked at me and she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry." And she looked at the boys and she said, "Boys, your manners." And I was thinking, manners? They're starving. Let them eat. And I just became so very aware in those moments of the need that was there and the importance of them having what they need to be healthy and to survive. And so as I left there that day, I had a hard time thinking about going home. You know, at my house, we had a fire going in the fireplace. My kids and husband were baking cookies, and I was going to come home and play a game with them after bed. And it just didn't feel right doing that with this little family just down the road who was really suffering in many ways. So I went back to my classroom and I sat down at my desk and laid my head down and cried like I hadn't cried in a long time, thinking about how much abundance there was in my life and how much this little family needed. And I just made a resolve to do what I could to make sure that this family had what they needed and to connect them in whatever ways I could to make sure that they were able to do everything that they were needing to do and wanting to do. So as time went by, David's mom was able to actually get into another cabin. She stopped by again one day after school and said, I've been doing well there and they want me to be able to have more space, so they're moving me into one of the larger cabins, and it actually has a bedroom and a kitchen and everything that we need. And she was so excited, and I said, "Well, what do you need?" And her response was, "I guess everything." And so we worked together as a school community and made a big list of all the things we need to set up housekeeping, and she shared some of the things that she needed that she really would like to have. And our little school community just went to town. We gathered old big pots and spoons and things that we had that were gently used, and some new things, and towels and sheets and all those things that are needed to set up housekeeping. And the day that we went over to deliver them was so exciting. We stopped by and we were all carrying these boxes of things in, and they were so excited, and were really thrilled getting it all put away in their house. And so I couldn't believe the feeling that I was having. What a gift it was to be able to help somebody in such a concrete way. And what lesson in setting ego aside that mom gave me of how to accept help when we need it. It was wonderful. And so anyway, it was around Thanksgiving weekend when that happened. And so I went home, and my family was all sitting around, and we were actually putting up our Christmas tree that weekend. And as we're pulling out all of our old decorations, there was our first Christmas tree, our artificial tree that my husband and I had gotten when we were first married. And I looked at him and I said, "You know where this needs to go?" And he agreed. And so we took that Christmas tree and some lights and a few ornaments and went over to their home and walked in and said, "Would you like to have a Christmas tree?" And they were so excited. And so the boys immediately started putting it up, and they got the lights out and decorations put up. And as we left, they were sitting there around it in soft light. And it was just such a beautiful moment. And as the days and weeks went by, this particular family became adopted by so many of the people in the community who really wanted to help. And it was all about relationship. It was all about someone finding out that this was a need, and people were offering to help with their utilities. And they ended up, his mom got a job locally where she could actually walk to work, the boys could walk to school, and she would be able to leave as needed whenever the boys had things going on. And so it was really beautiful to watch. And so as we came to the end of that year, David did so well. He finished that year like everyone else. You wouldn't have known there was an issue had you not had this opportunity to know what was going on behind the scenes. And it was really such a moment of learning for me about the importance of making sure our students have what they need. And part of that is to be in relationship with those parents. You know, whatever that situation is that they have at home, it does affect who they are, and it does affect their ability to be successful at school oftentimes. And there are things we can do. Sometimes it's out of our hands, but sometimes there are things we can do, and it's through those relationships, through getting to know the people that you work with, the families that you're serving, the students, beyond just what their test scores are, but who they really are and what they're dealing with, that we can really help. And so I guess that story helped me realize the importance of being open, taking time to get to know the people that are in our care, and making sure that we do whatever it is we can do to be of service and of help to families like that. And I'll wrap this story up by saying the following year, of course, I didn't have David in my classroom anymore, but I sort of kept tabs, and it got to be time for Christmas, and there were a couple families that wanted to adopt them again. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to take some things over. And so I was delivering gifts at one point to their new apartment. They had found an income-based apartment that they were able to rent, and I stopped over to deliver this bunch of gifts to them. And when David's mom opened the door, I was just overcome. I looked around their apartment, and there was everything that we had gathered for them last year that was making this little new place their home. The towel hanging on the oven door, the tree, the Christmas tree that had been in our home with their new decorations and pictures of their family, the games and the things that we had gathered last year were making this house a home. And it was so exciting to see. And I learned a lot that year. I learned a lot about setting aside sometimes those things that make us feel that we can't ask for help. Whether it's our pride or ego, whatever that is, sometimes there are things more important than that, and we need to be able to acknowledge that we need the help and then be in relationship with one another. And so I heard from David this last year. I got a Facebook message out of the blue. I hadn't talked to him for years. He's in his 20s now, and he sent me a message that said, I don't know if you remember me or not, Mrs. Steever, but I remember you. And I remember that year you helped me in ways that I just didn't even realize I needed. And getting that kind of a message from a student like that from so long ago was everything to me. And it's made me feel that whenever I can do something, whenever I can step out and help in some way, I want to do that. And that's what I think being in relationship with one another is all about.
So one of the ways that we like to create space for these relationships to be built is through something we call a circle of trust. And the norms that we set for a circle of trust are called our touchstones. So I'd like to take just a few minutes to go through the list of touchstones that we have and talk briefly about each one. So in the list, one of the first things that we like to make sure that we do each time is to be present as fully as possible. When we look at that and think about what it means to be present, yes, it means, turn off your cell phone. But also it's about making sure that you are bringing your whole self, that you are as not as distracted as maybe you are sometimes. Are there things you can do to help prepare to be in a good place and to really be present and listen to the people in the circle and to engage and listen to your own inner teacher as well? Also, everything that we do in a circle of trust is by invitation and not demand. And that's really an important one, because when people feel invited in to a question or to a request, that's a very different feeling than when it sort of feels like a do or die kind of thing, and they feel pressure to maybe engage when they're not ready. And so everything we do is really by invitation and meant to be something that people feel invited into. And when we think about that with our students, that's something we try to model with our circle of trust groups with teachers and things like that, is that the teachers have an opportunity to experience the difference between an invitation and a demand. Another one that can be kind of tricky for educators is this one that is about no fixing, saving, advising, or correcting. And you know, so many people come to us with questions every day and needing help and wanting our assistance, and sometimes advice or helping or maybe even fixing a little bit is what's needed. But when we're together in that circle of trust, when we're building this relationship with one another, it's really about making sure that we're not trying to fix each other. We're there to listen and to engage and to maybe offer a question back, but not to try to offer some sort of advice or assume that we know better than the individual for what they need. And then one of my favorite ones actually is turn to wonder. Turn to wonder is something where, you know, have you ever been with somebody who you're just like, they're so opposite of you, what they're sharing or where they are is so different from what you know to be true that you just wonder, where in the world is this person coming from? And what this idea of turning to wonder does for us is it's sort of that breath that we take in between our reaction and maybe some sort of a judgment that we might inflict. And so when we think about this, taking a moment to try to understand that person. I wonder what brought them there. I wonder why this is how they feel so strongly or why they feel so strongly about this issue. And maybe to turn it on ourselves and say, I wonder why I'm having such a strong reaction to this particular issue. And so turning to wonder helps us to just take that breath, to stop for a moment and move towards understanding instead of judgment. And so from those norms, those touchstones that we have, one of the things that I like to talk about with this is what Parker Palmer has to say about it. And his quote here is really beautiful. It says, "If we are willing to embrace the challenge of becoming whole, we cannot embrace it all alone, at least not for long. We need trustworthy relationships to sustain us, tenacious communities of support if we are to sustain the journey toward an undivided life." Parker J. Palmer. And that's really what being together in this way is all about. That's what we're trying to create. We're trying to create a community where we can bring everything about who we are to it and engage in good and meaningful ways. So one of the things we'd like to share about this idea of the circle of trust is it's actually something that's been around for a while, and there is some research tied to it about how it has helped schools and communities to improve things like student achievement and the relational trust among adults in schools. So I'd like to share a little bit about this research with just some highlights of some of the things that have come out of teachers and groups of individuals working on creating this kind of community around a circle of trust. And so as we look at this research, these are some of the highlights. As a result of participating in circles of trust, people report, and here are some of those things: this idea of a stronger sense of purpose and integrity. This idea also of being fully present. We talked about that with the touchstones, and that's something that can be difficult at times to do, to really be present to the people that we're working with and our students as well. This idea of being able to ask really good, open, and honest questions that help the learner, the person who's getting the question, to really think more deeply about whatever their issue is. There are other things like a greater confidence to seek or create communities of support, so really looking for that in their lives. And this idea of understanding, appreciation, and respect for differences. You know, in a politically divided and a divided world in so many ways, being able to appreciate and really respect another person's point of view that is very different from our own is hard. It's a rare thing to find. And so this is something that they have found is supported and promoted by engaging in the circle of trust. And also this idea of a deeper awareness of the identity and integrity of both ourselves and of others. And that's such an important thing in this world as well. Of course, this idea of a relational trust being built is a huge piece of this work. relational trust among the adults that work in schools, when that is present, they have found through this research that it actually increases student achievement as well. And so it's so important that we are able to trust the people that we work with and work towards creating an environment where everyone feels that they can trust what's happening, the people who are around them, and the choices and decisions being made. And last here, this idea of more courage, renewed passion, and deeper commitment for the work we're doing and the involvement we have with the students and colleagues that we're with every day. So those are some of the big findings of the research done around this idea of a circle of trust, and why we feel strongly that it's something that schools should really look at doing to try to create this sort of atmosphere with their staff, so that they can lead the school in a really good, healthy, positive way. So as we move from that, our next section is about learning. Learning. Healthy relationships are the basis for authentic and relational learning.
So we've looked at the importance of uniqueness. We've looked at the importance of relationships and the relational building of relationships within our schools, with our students, with each other. And so now we're going to give a little bit of a focus to how that fits in with learning. We're going to talk about relational learning, and I've got a little story to tell you about. So this is a story about me, and that's my papa there, and that's my dad. And the story is really about me and about my dad, and it's really about, you see, my dad was a coach. He was a basketball coach, and he was a teacher, and actually in this picture he was a camp director for a summer. But I'm going to talk about something that my dad did a lot of, but it was not his forte necessarily, and that's working on the car. And that's something that we did together. That's something, I grew up in Nebraska, playing basketball with your dad and working on the car with your dad. It seems like those are two important things in Nebraska culture. So anyway, I'm going to tell a little story about working on the car. You know, when our car would break down, we didn't have the luxury of having a lot of money to go find a real mechanic to put that thing in the shop and to do it right. And so my dad became the mechanic, and Dad would go out there and he'd put the car up on the ramps, and he'd get the tools that we had, and he'd get a couple of flashlights, and he'd say, "Come on, Scott," and we'd crawl up under there. And of course, my job was to be the torchbearer, you know, the one who held the flashlight and kept it, and occasionally then to grab a tool and hand it to him, because he was up there working to try to see what he was doing and to get the next tool. And so I was there with him, kind of in an apprentice sort of setting. Now, here's the important thing about this. I had this belief that my father knew exactly what he was doing, and that he would eventually come to the right conclusions and the right actions, and that our car would once again work. I didn't know enough to know that that may not be Dad's primary big thing that he's really great at. He was a great coach. He was a great dad. He was a great husband, great father, and he was a passable mechanic in a pinch. But I had confidence in him that he knew what he was doing. But part of that was because my father, number two, didn't need me to follow a plan so much as he needed me to maintain a particular posture. He didn't sit me down and say, "Okay, now here's what's wrong with the car, and here's what we're going to do, and here's how it's going to work. So step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. That's never what it was. He needed me to be there, to watch, to be attentive, and to respond, to be ready to respond as he needed, with the light or with the tool. Okay, and so that was how it worked. There's a couple of things that I learned from this concerning learning. One, I held a cognitive posture of belief in his capacity to lead me through this experience. And that's really important. As a learner, the person who's leading me, the person I'm apprenticed to, the person who's my mentor, my teacher, my facilitator, whoever it is, that I have a belief that they can lead me through this experience successfully. Number two, I maintained a physical posture of attentiveness to what might be needed or what might be happening next. Fortunately, and part of it was because of that number one thing, I wasn't thinking, oh, I wish I could be doing this, or, oh, I wish I was over there. I wish I was doing that. I really was plugged in. I was there because it was an important thing. I knew our car wasn't working, and I knew my dad was going to get it fixed, and I knew he needed my help because he told me he did. He needed me to hold that light just right. He needed me to hand him the next tool because he couldn't reach it. So I was there, and I was attentive. I was physically there. I was there in focus. And then, lastly, most importantly, I developed an ever-growing inward posture of initiative as I gained understanding and began to predict and anticipate even what the next tool was, or the next step might be, or where I need to move that light so he can see. He didn't cut me out. He didn't say, just do what I tell you. He encouraged me to be thinking ahead and to be looking at what might need to happen next. So, if we look at those three things, the first one has to do with relationship. We've already talked a lot about that. There's a strong positive relationship, a relationship that had engendered a lot of confidence. And second of all, there was engagement. I was fully there. I wasn't kind of halfway there. I wasn't focused elsewhere. I was fully plugged in and attentive. And lastly, I had agency, which is incredibly important. I wasn't just passive. My dad had created a situation in which I knew I could really contribute. I might have an idea. I might know where to point the light or which tool would help. And all of those three things work together. Well, there's some research around all three of these things: relationship, engagement, and agency. We're not going to look at a lot of it. There's going to be some links in the resources to that. But we're going to take a look at a few things, just some key points around relationship and learning. Learning is best done with people, not for them. It's most effective when learners are participants rather than recipients. The central element in promoting learning, therefore, is promoting relationships. Teacher-pupil relationships, peer-to-peer relationships, and children's relationships with siblings, mentors, and role models. Relationship is a place where learning happens. It should be a huge focus in our schools and our classrooms. Relationships, building them, promoting them, making sure they happen, making sure they're safe. Engagement. One of the biggest pitfalls that all educators must avoid is mistaking compliance for engagement. We've talked about a culture of compliance before. A culture of compliance rises out of fear. It rises out of that transactional accountability, that, oh, I better do this or I'm going to, for me in middle school, it came out of the whole reward or punishment system. I've got to do this, and I'll get a reward for it, or I better not get caught doing that because I'll get really in bad trouble if I'm not getting my work done. Well, that doesn't promote engagement. It promotes compliance. And when that happens to teachers and educators and schools, it promotes compliance. Okay? Lastly, agency. Research suggests that hopefulness is the function of agency. The belief that one can change things and that pathways and opportunities to act to achieve a desired goal. You know, I thought about agency a lot because I tend to be a person who needs a lot of autonomy. I need to know that I'm actively doing something, that I make a difference in something. But the idea of hopefulness, if in my learning experience I don't have agency, I'm not actively engaged, my resources, the stuff that I have inside me isn't being tapped, I don't have a place for hopefulness. Because once the teacher's gone, once the mentor's gone, I'm lost. If I have agency in my learning experience, I develop that hopefulness. That even once they're gone, I can solve problems. I can crawl under a car maybe and figure out what was going on, and figure out how to fix it, figure out which tool to get. Okay? So agency is so incredibly important in the process. What we'd like to do, and Sharla's going to give voice to this poem, but what we'd like to do is enter into what we call a third thing. And it's a poem that I think speaks to some of this having to do with relational learning. The poem's called Fire, and we've processed this with many teachers before, but we're going to let Sharla give voice to that. And then we're going to talk just a little bit about it before we move into the next quadrant.
Fire. What makes a fire burn is space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs packed in too tight, can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between, as much as to the wood. When we are able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is fuel and absence of the fuel together that make fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. Fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. Judy Sorenbrow.
What I'd really like to highlight in the poem is this piece at the end. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. To me, this speaks a lot of our confidence in each other as human beings for whom learning is a natural thing. You know, bless their hearts, my middle school teachers didn't have a lot of confidence. They knew I could learn, but for some reason the system had taught them that if they weren't continually staying on top of everything and making sure there were lots of rewards in place and punishments in place and really staying on top of things and really making sure that they forced the connections between me and the content that I was supposed to learn, that learning wouldn't happen. For some reason, the system had taught them not to be able to see the fire that was already burning inside me for a lot of different things. See, it's seeing that fire, having confidence that that fire is going to spread, and then as a teacher, as an educator, having the creativity to say, I can help you make that connection. I can help you connect this thing you're excited about, that you don't have to give up to learn. I can help you connect that with this stuff that I know about, that I was hired to help you explore and experience. I can find those connections. I can help you do that. We can do it together. Not me doing it for you. You'll still have agency. You'll be in charge. That's good relationship. That's relational learning. So that brings us to our next and final quadrant. We've kind of come full circle, back to humanity. Authentic learning feeds and supports and promotes our humanity.
You know, as a teacher for quite a few years, I'm always struck by how much I learned from my students. You know, our job is to teach, but so often I feel like I learn more from them than they could possibly learn from me. And there's one particular student from years ago that I learned so much from. And so I wanted to share a little bit about her story. Her name's Kayla. And Kayla was one of those kiddos who you've probably had a student, if you've taught for any length of time, who tends to be sort of dramatic. Lots of hand on the forehead because something happened, someone used her pencil that didn't ask, or she didn't get to be first down the slide. I mean, you kind of get the idea of what this kiddo is like. And so Kayla, this particular year, happened to be that way in my room. And one day, it was right after lunch recess, and if you were like me, if there was going to be a problem during the day, it happened at lunch recess. I'm not sure how that happens every day, but it seemed like every day there was something. Well, this particular day, everybody had come back in, and we were getting settled and ready for math. And I was looking around the room, and I noticed that there was one open seat. And I realized, oh, that's Kayla. And I looked around the room a little bit, and there I see over on my futon in the reading corner, 2 little feet sticking out from under a bunch of pillows, totally covered otherwise. It was Kayla. And so I had found that it was sometimes easier to not make an issue of it when this sort of thing would happen, or when it appeared that some attention was needed. So I decided to try that first. And so I just made an announcement to the class and said, all right, it's time for math, and let's make sure we have everything out and ready to go, and we'll get started here in just a moment. And there was no movement on the couch. So waited another moment or so and said, okay, I need everybody to be ready for math, and we're going to start here very quickly. No movement. And so finally I said one more time, I've asked you to be ready for math. If there is a reason you can't be ready for math, you need to come and let me know. Otherwise, let's get to it. And I hear from around the classroom, Kayla, she's talking about you. Finally, a little bit of movement from those little feet on the couch. So up comes Kayla walking towards me, big winter coat on and upset. And I said, Kayla, is there something wrong? Is there something you need? She said, well, it was at recess and so said such and such and hurt my feelings and I don't know. I said, okay, well, do you need something? Do you need to talk to this person? What would help? She's like, I don't know. I said, well, you still have your heavy winter coat on. Why don't you take your coat back to your locker, get a drink, use the restroom. I bet you'll feel better. Come back to class. Okay. And so she left. So I'm starting to get things ready and going with the rest of the class, and I happened to look over at a paraprofessional who was in the room with me, and she's looking at me with huge eyes, and she goes something like this. And I look over, and walking right into our classroom, in a full zebra suit, is Kayla. It had ears, it had hooves. She was in a full zebra suit. And I looked and I didn't know what to do. I know my jaw dropped, and I'm looking around the class and they're all just sort of staring and wondering what to do too. And so I did the best thing I knew how, and I said, okay, 4th graders, just take a minute, get a book out for a moment. I'll be right back. And so I said, Kayla, you want to go to the hallway with me? And okay, very sad zebra. So we walked out into the hallway, and I said, okay, Kayla, what's going on? And she said, well, so-and-so said such and such, and it really hurt my feelings, and I don't feel good. And I said, well, do you need an apology? I mean, this person is your friend normally, so it's normally not a problem. So help me know what you need. Do you need to talk about it with her? What do you need? She said, well, no, I mean, actually just kind of being out here and telling you about it, I feel better. I said, okay, well, I mean, do you feel like you could come back to class? Do you feel like you're ready? She said, yeah, I think so. And so I said, okay, good. And I looked at her and I said, so, want to tell me about the zebra suit you're wearing? And she says, like she had completely forgotten she had it on, oh, well, you told me to go back to my locker and try to feel better. And when I opened my locker, I saw it laying there, and I thought, that would make me feel better. And so I put it on. I said, okay. I said, well, are you ready to take it off now? And she said, yep. And I said, all right, I'll meet you back at class. So she goes skipping down the hallway, literally skipping, and takes her zebra suit back. And in just moments, she's back in the classroom. And I think one of the moments that I was most proud as a teacher was that moment that she walked in. There wasn't staring, pointing, laughing, snickering from the rest of the class. She was welcomed back in. She sat down, she got started on her math with us, and she was ready to go. And she was just accepted right back in. And I thought, that's when you know you've got that family system developed in your class. You know, family is where we should be able to fully let our hair down. And, you know, all of this issue that Kayla was dealing with was really hard for her. And she did the best thing she knew how to make herself feel better. And, you know, I learned a lot from that day. Kayla knew something was off. She knew something was wrong. She wasn't feeling good. She was trying to help make herself feel better. She started by isolating herself and trying to sort of self-soothe, and that wasn't working, and I didn't give her enough time to do it for it to work. And then she came up and she tried to talk to me, but there wasn't really the time in that moment to do it the way she needed. And so she did the best thing she knew how. She went back to her locker and put her zebra suit on. And so she came back doing the best she could with what she knew how in the moment. And that's what made her finally make enough of a point to me that she needed me for me to stop what I was doing and go out and be with her and talk with her. And that's what she really needed. She needed me to take the time to hear her, really hear her. And once she was able to do that, she was ready to learn again. She knew she needed something. She knew that she wasn't right, that she was off center. And you know, she did the best she could to figure that out. And I think about all of us walking around every day. You know, hurt people hurt people. And if we can't get ourselves centered back when those hurts happen, we're just going to walk around hurting more people. Do we know what our zebra suit is? What is it that is going to help us feel better when that hurt happens? Because that's the reality. All of these unique individuals walking around every day, bumping into each other, trying to engage with one another, hurt is bound to happen. So what do we do when that happens? Do we have the tools? Are we ready to notice and do something about it before we hurt another person? And that's what Kayla taught me that day. She taught me the importance of me knowing what my zebra suit is. And that's what my hope is for you as well. Do you know what it is that you need when times get tough, when things happen and you're feeling out of whack or off center? Do you know how to get back? Do you know what your zebra suit is?
So as we think about what our zebra suit is, each of us individually, that's really all about self-care. And this last section is, self-care is the focus of this last section that we'd like to talk about. It's really, what can we do? You know, when we're out about in our day and things happen to us, we engage with people, we have frustrations and things that come about that are difficult. How do we come back to our center? How do we help recharge ourselves so that we can continue to go about making all the decisions that we need to do in a day? You know, think of how many questions you're asked in a day as a teacher. There's just, it's constant. And so that's a constant depleting too of your ability to stay charged up and ready to go. So I love this quote about self-care. Self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift I have, the gift I was put on earth to offer to others, by Parker Palmer. Again, if we don't take care of ourselves, if we're not in a place where we can really be solid and healthy and strong, then how are we going to be able to offer assistance to those that we're serving at the time? So as we think about that, there are a variety of ways we might consider doing some self-care or offering self-care for our students as well. You know, there are many schools now that are creating spaces within their building that are sort of decompression spaces, places where teachers can come, put their feet up, relax, and recharge. And I think it's one of the best things we can do for our staff in schools to, you know, you think about how many things are happening in the course of a day. Being able to come and just sit and take a load off for a moment is something that is so valuable. So having a space like that at school can be wonderful. But also when you're outside of school, there are a lot of things we can do that can help us to recharge and to help us take care of ourselves in good ways. One of them being going outside, spending time in nature, reconnecting with everything around us in the natural world can be a very centering kind of experience for us. Very healthy, just getting that fresh air, sunshine on our faces, all of those good things can be very helpful. Also, a lot of research has been done about just the power of looking up. You think about how much of our day is spent either looking at a screen or down or even helping students or whatever it is. So much of our day is spent with our neck and our head looking down. So taking time to simply look up at the sky. I used to take my students out when it was nice. We would lay in the grass for about 5 minutes in the morning as we were changing classes and just look at the clouds and breathe deeply, do some stretches, and it was amazing how much that helped and how much better we did in our next class following that. So I would encourage you with your students as often as you can to take time to even go outside. If you have a place you can go out and have them sit down on the ground or lay down on the ground and spend a little time just looking up. Also, having opportunities for our feet to actually touch the earth. There is something about that, and I've included, we'll talk about some resources, but I've included some research done on the importance of having our bare feet touch the earth and what that can do for in the way of energy and minerals and the vitamins that our body needs to stay healthy. So spending time just taking our shoes off and getting our feet onto the earth is something that we can do that helps. Also, this last one is really about coming together with good people you trust, people you can share with and feel comfortable with, and having time to decompress in that way by sharing about your day, if that tends to be something that you need as an individual. Some people, more introverted people, might need time just by themselves, but making sure you know yourself well enough to know which is going to be most helpful for you. So when you think about this self-care, I'd like you to just take a moment to think about these two questions. What self-care techniques do you use most often? And what self-care opportunities do you provide for your students? Are there ways we can be providing opportunities during the day for our students to relax, to recenter, to refocus? What are some ways we can do that? Well, I want to share some that we have found, but I'd like you to think about that too for yourself. If there are things that you know you're doing already that maybe you need to do a little more of, or if you need some ideas, I'd like to share some of those with you as well. So if you would like, you can scan this or take down this short URL, and we have put together a list of resources for you. And they are things that you can do with your students or that you can do personally or share with other teachers that help with that whole idea of self-care and how to take care of ourselves and to be more healthy and balanced in our day-to-day life. So I'd like for you to either scan that QR code or take down the shortened URL there, and you can have access to all the resources. The other thing that we have on that resources page is also the research that we have that supports all of the work that we're doing within this Keynote. So I would just encourage you to take a little time to look at that when you have time, and hopefully you'll find something in there that will be useful to you and that you can try to use.
Well, with those words from Sharla in mind, we're going to wrap this up the same way we began it with my zebra suit. That's a little song I wrote. This is called My First Song. from an experience I had in first grade. We'd like to remind all of you to be safe. Thank you for everything that you're doing. And we hope that this has been helpful, both for you and for the students and the communities that you serve.
I was only 6 or 7 years old. You must have been a worn out 32. I don't know what stories you've been told. I don't know what you went home to. But you had a tiredness behind your eye. You had a shuffle in your walk. They only left when your anger flared. You felt like hell made out of dead awake and chalk. You felt like hell made out of dead awake and chalk. You felt like hell made out of dead awake and chalk. It was a song, my very first, the kind of first grader would like to write. Full of wannabe Maurice Sendak and Dr. Seuss, yeah. Full of possibility and light. And like this, see. One day I was walking down a street, and a funny old man I did meet. He was walking on his big old feet, till it fell right down on his seat. Yeah, that's what I wrote. My first song. You'd given us a few minutes and a blank sheet of lined paper. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. Maybe I wasn't listening, maybe I was scared. But knowing me, it was probably just that song I had to write. Yeah. My first song. I made language in the music. I gave it a beat, I gave it a rhyme. Made it funny, I made a story. One that didn't exist outside of right there. What I did in my mind. I wrote my first song, yeah. I wrote my first song. I wrote my first song, yeah. On that paper you handed to me. What I really wanted to see was what you might think of it. Would you laugh? Would you smile? Could it brighten that darkness that was there behind your eyes? Would you sing it out loud? Your tired, angry eyes, they looked and they read it and they got more tired. You could have just put it down now. Too bad you couldn't just retire. Now, you stole my poetry. You went and stole my literary device. Across the top, you wrote no on my first song. You wrote no, big red letters across the top. You wrote no on my first song. So I became a teacher. Teacher with a guitar in his hand. May sound corny, may sound unrigorous. Yeah, but someone gotta take a stand for singing. Yes, 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 you got a song to sing. Yes, 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 I won't give up on you. Yes, 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 you're gonna let freedom ring. Yes, 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 you are the best when you are you. Yes, 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 you got a song to sing. Yes, 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 I won't give up on you. Yes, 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 gonna let freedom ring. Yes, 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 you are the best when you are you. You're the best when you are you. You are you. You're the best when you are you. I was only 6 or 7 years old. You must have been a worn out 32. I was only 6 or 7 years old. You must have been a worn out 32. I don't know what stories you've been told. Don't know what you went home to. But you brought a tiredness behind your eyes, and you brought a shuffle in your walk. They only left when your anger flared. Felt like hell made out of ditto ink and chalk. Yeah, felt like hell made out of ditto ink and chalk. It felt like hell